Turn with me to Genesis chapter 19. Genesis chapter 19. In Genesis chapter 19, we are going to start in verse 12, and we're actually going to read past what's on the slide all the way through the end of the chapter. Genesis chapter 19, starting in verse 12. Then the men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of the place. For we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord. And the Lord has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. And as they brought them out, one said, "Escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away." And Lot said to them, "Oh no, my lords. Behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved." He said to him, "Behold, I grant you this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing till you arrive there." Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew these cities, and all the valley, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the valley. And he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that, when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham, and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. Now Lot went up out of Zoar, and lived in the hills with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. So he lived in a cave with his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve offspring for our father." So they made their father drink wine that night. And the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she arose. The next day the firstborn said to the younger, "Behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father." So they made their father drink wine that night also. And the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ammi. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day.
What's our invitation song? I didn't write it down. 840. Thank you. 848. I'm close. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I see. I always say I see a handful of visitors, and I do. It's really nice to have so many of you visiting with us today. But especially this morning, I see a handful of our campers from other places. And it's really nice to see you all. It's always good to, I call you my people. It's always good to see my people here. And so make sure that I see that some of you have already integrated back there, but make sure some of you kids who have friends from camp, look around and see some people from camp who are here, who are not normally here, and get to make those friendships. Anyway, over the last long time, I've been talking about Genesis, and last week we talked about Sodom's sin. The title of that lesson was Sodom's sin, and you can go through the first 11 verses of Genesis chapter 19, and you can see, okay, here is the problem. And one of the patterns that I've tried to follow in all of these Genesis studies is we look at the text first, and then we move to some lessons that we can take away from it, some applications. And so you see Sodom's sin in the text first, and some of our applications from last week were, especially now, I've not always felt this way, but especially now, I don't know how you can read and study the story of Sodom and not think about our country today and some of the things that we see happening all around us today. And so there's some application to take away from that. And the same thing is true with our text from this morning, only today I'm going to be talking about Lot and his problem and some of the problems. That should probably be plural, Lot's problems, or maybe what one of the core problems was that Lot had here. I want you to please pay closer special attention to this lesson today, though, and here's the reason why. Last week we talked about Sodom and Sodom's sin, and here's the thing. Well, in 2 Sundays, not next Sunday, but the Sunday after that, we're going to talk about our interceding for Sodom. And so I don't want to say there's nothing that we do with Sodom. There is something that we do. We try to go and get them and bring them to the Lord. Their salvation is just as important as our salvation. And so we have something to do. But the difference between last week's lesson and this week's lesson is that's Sodom. There's nothing we can do about Sodom. They are what they are. It is what it is. And hopefully, I look at that and I say, that is categorized by the sin that we read about in the Bible. And I'll try to teach people how to come out of that, but there's nothing I can do about that. This lesson, though, is about me. It's about us. And there is something that we can do about this. It's not Sodom. It's Lot's relationship to Sodom and where Lot decided to park his tent and how Lot decided to interact with the rest of the city. And so last week we read about this, 2 Peter chapter 2 and verses 7 and 8, where Lot was greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of what he saw happening around him in the city of Sodom. The text says that he was tormented by some of these things, and he was a righteous man, and his soul was just bothered by what he saw happening in the city of Sodom. And so we would look at Lot and we would say, good, at least that. But one of the things that I think you're going to see as we move through the text today is that does not mean that Lot's hands were clean in this mess. And even though he may have felt bad about the sin that he saw around him in Sodom, he still was a man. And I think you don't have to see, like any one of us is capable of making any of these mistakes. But Lot made a lot of mistakes. And as I go through the text here, what I see is a man who's not very good at decision making. He might have been a good moral man who was distressed by the sin that he saw around him, but he still is not faultless in some of the things that are going on here. So today, let's talk about Lot's problem. Number one, I'm going to go all the way back to chapter 13 and verses 10 through 13. And as I was preparing this and thinking about, what's going on in this text and what it means for me and how I'm supposed to apply it today, I think the downhill slide starts here. This is where everything goes bad. In Genesis chapter 13, starting in verse 10, Abraham and Lot are both wealthy. There's not enough room in the land for all of their stuff, for their livestock and their people that they have and all of that. And so Abraham says, you choose which way you're going to go, Lot. If you go that way, then I'll go that way. If you go that way, then I'll go that way. And so here's where we are, verse 10. Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from the Lord. And Abraham settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. And so here is, I think, the start of everything that goes bad in this story. Lot has a choice to make. And I think that we should remember, like Lot and Abraham together where they were where they were because God had promised to give them that land. We call it the promised land for that reason. And so Abraham says to Lot, you can either have the promised land or you can go over that way. And Lot looked around and he said, hey, look at that. There's green grass and lots of water. I'm gonna get rich. My sheep are gonna have plenty to eat. There's always gonna be water. I'm gonna go that direction, and I'll live over there because that looks better, at least according to human appearances. And so he made this terrible choice, and he took his family with him to go to this place. And the text tells us, look at all of the things in verse 10. The text, there are at least 3 things in these 4 verses that are just setting off red flags all over the place. The text says, this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot decided to go that way, and the text says, before God burned them down. And we're saying, wait, what? God burned them down? What? God destroyed that. And then later it says that he went east. And so here we've already seen people moving east away from the presence of God. And we're supposed to think when we hear that, Lot is going to a condemned city away from the presence of God. In verse 13, now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. But hey, at least there was green grass and water there. Come on, family, let's go. Because that's where our sheep are going to have plenty of food to eat. And so you start here with the thing that I think we're going to see over and over again throughout this text. Lot may very well have been disturbed and tormented by the sin that he saw happening around him, but he's the one who chose to go and live there. He made that choice. He had the option to stay in the promised land, and he chose to go there and to take his family with him. Number 2, Genesis chapter 14. We're not going to read this text, but this is the story of the kings from the north, from the Fertile Crescent, that come down and fight against the kings around Sodom on the other side of the Dead Sea. And they come down and they take everybody's stuff, and they take Lot too. And they go, and Abraham has to go and save his relative and bring it back. We talked about that whole story at the time. But this is another thing. As you read that whole story, Lot has already been caught up in Sodom's mess. He's already been involved in this dumpster fire of this sinful city and the battles and the fighting, and Lot was taken captive and his family with him and all of his stuff. He is already caught up in Sodom's mess, and Abraham comes and rescues him, and apparently he just decides to go right back home. And so this is the thing that I'm thinking about with Lot. Like, yes, he's disturbed by the sin that he sees around him, but you are choosing to live in the place where there's sin all around you. This is the second time now that he has consciously made the choice, knowing that this place is what it is, to be there and to stay. In chapter 19 and verse 1, I'm not going to read all of these different texts this morning, since Nick read them for us this morning. Chapter 19 and verse 1, this matters, I think. You remember at the end of Genesis 13 and verse 13, it said, so Lot moved his tent as far as Sodom. So he started living on the outskirts of Sodom. And then he got caught up in Sodom's mess, and he came back. And by the time we get into Genesis 19 and verse 1, it says, the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. Here's something to think about with that. A commentary on this section, their arrival in Sodom, finds Lot sitting by the gate of Sodom. The gate is a common place for meetings in the East, either for conversation, for business, for the administration of justice. It is normally a place where the town leaders and kings assemble to adjudicate the business at hand. And so Lot started by parking his tent near Sodom, and now by the time we get into Genesis 19, he's sitting in the gate with all the other leaders of the city. Like he's a part of it. He's there. And so you see this incremental process. He makes a decision. He goes here. He gets caught up in their mess. He gets even deeper into the belly of the beast. Let's keep on going. Lot gave his daughters to Sodom. Now this part I will tell you, and I have to tell you this. This is speculation. It's the best that I can do on this. Some people would probably say, well, if it's speculation, maybe you shouldn't do it. Read the text with me and let's see what you see about it. Verse 12. The men said to Lot, have you anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, anyone who you have in the city. Bring them out of this place. So God, these angels say to Lot, the city is about ready to be destroyed. Do you have anybody else in the city who needs to be rescued with you and the rest of your family? And he says, well, we're about to destroy the city in verse 14. So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, up, get out of this place. And they don't believe what he's saying, and so they choose to stay. But I'm reading through this story, and the thing that pops into my head is, you gave your daughters to men of the city of Sodom? We know about the men of the city of Sodom. We already read about that last week, and remember how the text made a big deal about all the people in the whole city, young and old, all of them. Now, here's the speculation. Maybe this is some of Lot's people who are also living with Lot in the city, and he didn't say, hey, daughters, here's some husbands who are Sodomites from the town of Sodom who live here. Maybe they're his own people, but nevertheless, here are his daughters, and he gives his daughters to be married to people who live in Sodom, and we know that there are no righteous people in Sodom. Just connect the dots here. Lot is apparently a serial bad decision maker. He doesn't seem capable of seeing the right direction and walking down that path in all of these things that we're looking at in all of this stuff. And so jump down to verses 15 and 17. We actually will read this one. I highlighted in my Bible. Becky said to me last week, she said, every single class and lesson you say, highlight this. She said, I can't highlight my whole Bible. And I said, here's the thing. I'm talking about it. So obviously it's important. I wouldn't be talking about it if it wasn't important. So this is the thing that I highlighted in this section. The text specifically says, Lot lingered. Verse 15. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, get up! Well, my text just says, up, with an exclamation mark. Up! What are you doing? Up! Take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he lingered. That's the part that's highlighted in the Bible. That's the key for this. But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by his hand. And the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out of the city and set him outside the city. And as they brought him out, one said, escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away. So there's a couple things in this story, in this section of the story, that I see. First of all, when you start this story, it says, when when everybody's laying down to go to bed, that's when the men of the city of Sodom came and the incident happened. So let's call that nighttime, right at the beginning of nighttime. Now, the men said after that, hey, you got to get out of here. We're about ready to destroy this place. And now, the text tells us in our verses right now that it's morning. And so, just process that for a second. You have witnessed a miracle. These angels struck the men of the city blind, and you have been miraculously saved from this situation. And after having witnessed a miracle, the angels say, you got to get out of here. We're about to destroy this place. And your lot and your family, and you say, all right, let's go to bed and we'll sleep on it, and we'll do it in the morning. I mean, seriously, like, process. If I'm in Lot's shoes and the angels say, we're about ready to destroy this place, I'm saying, everybody grab a banana and that's it, we're on the road. Like, now, we're gone. And not only that, but the text, he lingered. They say, get up, come on. The idea is, what are you still doing here? And it says, he lingered. And then the text tells us, they literally had to grab Lot by the hand and drag him out of the city of Sodom. So here's where we're starting to see some things, I think, that might help to understand some of the problem in this text and what's going on here. I said last week that we were going to come back to chapter 19 and verse 8. It seems to me, as I read this story and I read about Lot, that even though he's described as a righteous man who was disturbed and tormented by the sin that he saw happening around him in the city of Sodom, even though that was true, it seems like Sodom was a little bit more a part of him than he would have liked to admit. He was at home there. He was in the gate. His daughters were engaged to the men of the city. When it was time for the city to be destroyed, he lingered and had to be drugged out of the city. And so, do you remember last week when the men of the city are trying to beat down the door in order to rape the two angels who have stayed with Lot, that Lot says, no, don't do this terrible thing. Here are my two daughters. Which is, as I read the story, that's the thing that jumps off the page at me. You did what? You were going to give them your daughters instead of the two men, the strangers who were visiting with you? And I said, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about that. I think that if you consider that maybe there was a little bit more Sodom in Lot than he would like to have admit, that maybe that helps to explain how a person gets to this point of apparently no sense of morality with your own family, that you're just like, hey, don't do this, here are my daughters. Well, I mean, he was a part of Sodom. He lived in Sodom. What do you expect from him? The whole point of this story is that this town was entirely morally bankrupt. And so here is some of the moral bankruptcy. I think that also explains, we're not going to read it, but verses 30 through the end of the chapter, where Lot and his daughters leave, and these daughters have this great idea to get pregnant by their dad. And we read this story and we're like, what is going on here? They were raised in the moral sewer of Sodom. Why not behave like that? I mean, you can only expect that this is what they saw every day. God was destroying this city because they were morally bankrupt. And so I take these last 2 points. I had to try and fill the picture out just a little bit, but I think it fits even more into this point that Lot gave his daughters to Sodom. He gave them to the men. He offered them to the masses to be mistreated. And apparently, morally, they didn't have any sense of any of that stuff either. And so, lastly, in Genesis chapter 19 and verses 23 to 26, Lot's family was being dragged out of the city. And the angel said, don't look back. And Lot's wife turns around and looks back and turns into a pillar of salt. I can give her the benefit of the doubt. It's like when you drive past a car wreck on the road, like everybody wants to look. It's a thing, right? Everybody wants to look and see what's going on. The city was being destroyed by fire from heaven. I'd probably want to turn around and look at that too. I think, though, if you fill the text out and you take some of the context clues away from this story, it seems like what this is pointing to is that she was looking back at her home, and she wanted it both ways. She wanted to stay in Sodom, but she also didn't want to be destroyed by the fire. And so here is this situation where the woman looks back, and anyway, here's a summary. Another commentary. His true loyalty was revealed as godly, but in the process, his past hypocrisy was uncovered. The saint had pitched his tent near the evil city. I don't like the word saint in referring to Lot here, but this is coming from a commentary. The saint had pitched his tent near the evil city, but the evil city had controlled his life. Oh, he was moral. He knew great, great evil when he saw it. He opposed sodomy and homosexuality. Ironically, though, he would sacrifice his daughter's virginity to fend off the vice of evil men. He would escape the judgment by the grace of God, but his heart had become a part of this world. His wife was just too attached to the city to follow the call of grace, and his daughters were not uncomfortable with immorality with their father. And so, yeah, here's the main takeaway from what we're looking at in this. It seems like Lot was a little bit more at home in Sodom than he would probably like to acknowledge. So I've got 4 things for us to take away. There's the text. What's our takeaway? And the main thing is we talked about Lot's problem. Lot's problem is that I always think about this. Jake did this thing at camp with his team, and he would say, "We got that dog in us." You know, and then the idea is we're ready to go. We got that aggressive in us and all this. Here's the thing with we got that dog. Lot's got that Sodom in him. He's got the city and the world inside of him more than he would like to admit. And so the idea is let's not make Lot's problem our problem. Number 1, we don't belong here. Any more than Lot belonged in Sodom. I have a passage, 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 11. This is what Peter says to the Christians that he's writing to. Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh which wage war against your soul. As sojourners and exiles. When Peter referred to Christians living in the world, it doesn't matter what city they were in. When Peter referred to Christians living in the world, he said, you don't belong here. You're sojourners and exiles. You're just passing through. You're like a stranger without citizenship in the world that you live in. And so we don't belong here. Jesus specifically said when he was praying for people, he was praying to God for his people, he said, God, I don't ask you to take them out of the world. They live here. This is where we are. This is what we do. But he said, you are in the world, but you are not of the world. Sodom cannot be a part of us. We don't live in the world. This place is not our home, and we don't belong here. And I would just say this real quick about Lot. One of the things that you see happening, he was with Abraham. He moved to the outskirts of Sodom. He got caught up in Sodom's mess. Now he was in the gate. Apparently the moral sewer infected himself and his family. It's an incremental process. I think about Becky, she's got diabetes and she checks her sugar. She pokes her finger 8 times a day. And you can hear it, the needle goes in, and she pushes on her finger like this and the blood comes out, and she checks her finger. She does that about 8 times a day. But when she takes that needle and pokes her finger, she didn't even feel it anymore. And you can feel it when you grab her fingers. There's so many calluses around all of her fingers. She rotates. She bleeds. She can't even feel the needle anymore. And that's what it's like with us. That's what it's like with Lot. We live in the world, and we get deeper and deeper and deeper into the belly of the beast. And before we know it, Sodom has influenced us and it infected us, and we don't even We don't even feel it. We don't even know. So be mindful of that. It's an incremental process. Number 2, this is the one that I think about maybe more than anything else. We cannot sacrifice our kids to Sodom, no matter what happens. It's really disturbing. I know that we talked about this last week. Jude 5 tells us why Sodom was destroyed. And we can say, okay, God was done with this city, and this is the reason why. This is the most disturbing part of the story to me, though, that Lot says, hey, have my daughters instead. That's your family. That Lot would have just given his daughters to the men of Sodom, that they would be so infected by the moral sewage of the city that they would say, let's get pregnant from our own dad. He sacrificed his kids. And it wasn't out of his control, like it's a choice that he made. All along the way, he had these choices, and it's a choice that he made. I saw this last week. I want to throw it up for you. You know, every week on social media, there's like a thing. We don't have attention span for more than a couple days, and so there's this thing every week. And last week, this was the thing in my Twitter feed. Here's a girl, and the mom posts this picture of the girl, and she said, so here's what's happening. Let me give you some background behind all of this. Her daughter was getting caught up in Sodom's mess. She was getting all into the gender craze, and I'm all of these weird different things that are not boys and not girls and all of this. And this is what the mom says on Twitter. She says, I did not affirm my daughter. That's what we're supposed to do. We don't tell people this is bad. We're supposed to affirm who you are and your decisions. She said, I did not affirm my daughter. I removed her from the contagion. Within months, she pulled what I call a cease and desist. I thought that was a spelling error. It's not. The daughter opened up her eyes. She got out of the mess. She opened up her eyes. It's a cease and desist. She saw the truth and left the cult. Over a year later, she's thriving more than she ever was when she was involved in the gender craze. And so the mom says about this girl, I did something about it. I pulled her out. And so I read through some of the comments because this is going viral, and this one caught my attention. And one of the people asked the question that I asked, what did you do? I want to know. What did you do to pull her out of this and remove her from the contagion? And here's some of the things that she listed. I removed her from all social media. I purchased monitoring apps to block certain websites from her phone. I would receive these alerts if certain words were flagged in her searches or texts. I also would not let her spend time with any of her friends whose parents I didn't trust. And so here is a mom who said to the world, you are not having my daughter. She went to war. She pulled her daughter out of the belly of the beast and cut off the contagion and the sickness. And that's not why this is viral. This is why it's viral. You can see all kinds of these posts. Everybody was like, this is literally child abuse. Telling the mom that she was abusing the child from pulling her out of this horrible situation. And so the whole thing was, you're abusing your kid if you take their social media away. You're abusing your kid and violating their privacy if you monitor their apps and block the websites and get alerts and do all of these things that she did. I don't call that abuse. I call that parenting. Here is a mom who was not willing to sacrifice her kids, her daughter, to Sodom. Number 3. I said there are 4 things. This is number 3. Stop lingering. This goes for all of us. In chapter 19 and verses 15 and 16, as morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, get up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he lingered, so the men seized him and his wife and their 2 daughters by the hand, and they had to drag him out of the city. Turn over in your Bibles with me. It's not on the screen, so you have to turn to 2 Peter chapter 3. In 2 Peter chapter 3, do you realize, I didn't process this. I know these things, I read the Bible, I know these verses, but I didn't process it until I started writing the notes down on paper and walking my dog and trying to say it out loud. And as I said it out loud while I was walking my dog, it hit me. We are in the exact same situation. We live in Sodom, and God has specifically told us, I'm going to destroy Sodom. We're there, right? We live here, and we know that the fire's coming. It's not a secret. Read it with me. 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7. By the same word, the heavens and the earth that now exist are stored up for fire, being kept until the day of judgment and destruction of the ungodly. In verse 10, there's more. The day of the Lord will come like a thief, and the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved, and the earth and all the works that are done in them will be exposed. God said, you're in the world, and I'm going to destroy that world with fire. It is the exact same story as Sodom. Only God didn't say, I'm going to do it right this second. That's the only difference in this story. But here's the thing. Look at verse 9. This is what God says to us in the midst of this story. Verse 9. The Lord is not slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance. And you know what's happening right now in the world that we live in that God said is going to be destroyed by fire? Some of you are lingering. Some of you are just hanging out. You know that it's coming, or at least it's been told to you that it's coming, but you say, I'll just wait till the morning. And your parents and your friends, us at this congregation, we're grabbing you by the hand and we're saying, come on, man, we got to get out of here. This world is going to be destroyed. Stop dragging your feet. Stop lingering. Let's go. God has said, this is the way out of the world, into my presence. But the thing about this story that's not true with the story of Sodom is, I can't force you. I can't force you. Your parents can't force you. We can stand up here and we can say the world, the fire is coming, but it's your decision to make. At the end of each lesson, we offer an invitation. And the invitation is, if you would like to become a Christian, if you believe that Jesus is the Son of God and you're willing to come to God through faith in Christ and repent of your sins, be baptized, coming up out of the watery grave to walk in newness of life, we offer that opportunity at the end of each lesson, and we sing an invitation song. And there are some people, even today, who will linger in a world that's going to be destroyed by fire. Stop lingering. That was one of Lot's major problems. Lastly, you can't have it both ways. Maybe there are some people here who already are Christians. You said, okay, I know this is the thing that I need to do, and you've decided to do it. You've become a Christian, and you're kind of living as a Christian. You're running away from the world that's going to be destroyed by fire, but you're also turning around and looking back and longing because you would like to have it both ways. I mean, after all, the grass is green and it's well watered. Lot chose to go there because it looked good. Jesus said in Luke chapter 6 and verse 61, to a man who said to him, I will follow you, Lord, but let me first say farewell to those at my home. Jesus' response, no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. Can you imagine a man plowing a field? Here's the oxen that are pulling the plow, and I'm plowing the field, and the idea is to have straight lines, but I keep looking back at my last life, and my field looks like I'm not focusing on the task at hand because I just can't leave it behind. You can't have it both ways. Here's another one to think about. Philippians chapter 3, the second part of verse 13 and 14. One thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. Make your mind up. You're either going to stay in Sodom or you're going to move forward to the promised land with God. But you can't have both. You can't sit on the fence. There's no middle ground. Don't make Lot's problem your problem. If there's somebody who's here this morning and you know what you need to do in order to become a Christian, or if you already are a Christian but you've been looking back and riding the fence, maybe there's something we can do to encourage you or pray for you or hold up your hands or help you in this life. Come forward. Let us know what we can do to help as we stand and sing the invitation song.